lot. This is Western and Virginia, so you can see that protesters are already making their presence known here. They pretty much shut down Western Street.
Ain't no power like the power of the people.
Even before 8 o'clock, hundreds of protesters were on the go and beginning to converge from two opposite ends of downtown. Commuters were inevitably stuck in the middle.
It's kind of irritating me now.
It's a nightmare, and I wish they were doing it someplace else.
At intersections near the convention center, protesters were systematically beginning to shut Seattle down. Frustrated police for the first time began fighting back. They weren't very effective. While some protesters locked themselves together in the middle of the street, others dragged city fences into position to block police. Squad cars, which had already passed, now shifted into reverse to knock the fences down. Reporter Kyle Moore kept watch nearby.
Effectively, the protesters have blocked off the entire intersection here at 6th and University.
By this time, another large group finally reached the protesters' main destination, the Paramount Theater, site of the WTO's grand opening.
Let's turn the camera around here. The mesh fence that I just showed you a second ago is obviously not held up. That lasted about 10 seconds.
Seattle officials' priority one was already collapsing.
Are you going to take us to the convention?
Delegates were spread across town, caught in the fray, and unable to make it inside the Paramount Theater.
We couldn't get in, and the local police are not doing their job.
A view from under the wall of buses showed where delegates were trying to reach. As protesters clogged the streets surrounding the Paramount Theater, many found themselves face to face with those they came to protest.
It's a genuine effort.
Well, how much did you get paid for your point of view, though?
People were soon using ladders to climb atop the buses set up to block them. There were hundreds of protesters chanting, singing, and dancing in every direction. Police and delegates alike, it seemed, were at the mercy of the very protesters they knew were coming for months.
We're here outside the Paramount Theater, and this is the place the delegates were trying to reach.
The opening ceremonies were set to begin at 10 a.m., but only a handful of delegates were able to make it through. Take a look at this map. You have the Paramount Theater ringed by buses and demonstrators, and thousands of protesters were blocking every intersection around the convention center.
Last week, Megan Black was at the corner of 6th and Union with a group of demonstrators blockading the streets.
Approaching 10 o'clock Tuesday morning, things were getting very tense on the streets of downtown Seattle. Everywhere you looked, WTO delegates were trying to get to the convention center, and it was becoming obvious the protesters were succeeding in stopping them. Soon it also became obvious the police were becoming more aggressive. And so were the protesters as they dumped over newspaper machines. During this tense time, I was on the phone describing the scene.
Things started to turn violent. There was a lot of pushing and shoving. The protesters were getting shoved to the ground by riot police. And then everyone started chanting, as you might be able to hear them outside right now, no violence.
We have now learned that during Tuesday morning's protests, Seattle police had planned massive arrests. But now some officers tell us they were not only surprised by the sheer numbers of protesters, but they were horribly unprepared to make those arrests. Simply, police were overwhelmed and resorted to force to clear the massive crowds.
And your failure to leave the area will subject you to arrest for failure to disperse.
The crowd did not disperse. A few minutes after 10 Tuesday morning, as promised, police took action to clear the streets, first blanketing protesters in pepper spray. Then came the first of what would be many crowd-controlled tear gassings. My photographer and I got caught in a cloud of gas.
Let's move it over our coverage to 6th and Union, where Megan Black is. Megan, are you on the phone? And what's happening at your location?
I'm sorry. There's like massive tear gas here. We gotta go. They're rushing us away. The tank is moving through the streets right now. I'm sorry, I can't hardly talk, but I can't. The tear gas is really powerful.
All right, Megan.
I can't talk.
With our eyes stinging and tearing, choking and coughing, we tried to get away from the gas, along with many of the protesters. But even with the pain of the tear gas, some of those protesters still refuse to leave the streets. This scene was repeated many times at this intersection, and protesters stood their ground, adamant to stop the WTO meetings.
This was the scene inside the Paramount Tuesday morning, a nearly empty hall. Opening ceremonies were being delayed.
Back outside, Kyle Moore was a block away from Megan. He was at 6th and University. As we continue our timeline, Kyle catches up with a group of protesters who were standing their ground.
These groups have locked themselves in to concrete pipes. It's nearly 8 a.m. when environmental protesters swarm the intersection of University and 6th Avenue. I stood just across the street. Well, a lot of those delegates aren't getting into the convention center. I'll show you why. With arms linked, these men and women formed a human wall to stop delegates in their tracks.
Because WTO, the corporate heads of the world, are trying to rape and plunder the rest of what's left of our natural resources.
Earth First just moved in with this large inflatable sperm whale. They blocked off the whole intersection. Others used themselves as blockade. As you can see, this is a concrete right here. Their arms are actually fastened into these concrete containers.
It gets a little uncomfortable. I could have dressed better, but it's worth it. You know, we gotta do whatever to get heard.
Delegates definitely got an earful.
I'm trying to learn from these nice folks here who are committed to a cause. And rather than walk around and avoid them, I thought I'd engage them in conversation.
It's after 10 a.m. Megan Black is just a block away, caught in a tear gas cloud. 20 minutes later at 10:25 a.m., officers here decide they'd had enough. Donning gas mask and riot gear, the officers move to take back the intersection. They move in on hula hooping and praying protesters. Here, they just set off the first tear gas right here. We're going to back up a little bit. Our shot's going to get a little shaky, but tear gas, we're going to try to cover ourselves. Protesters scattered. Within 30 seconds, I was overcome by the gas.
It's a very painful smell. Let's just watch this for a second.
It took several minutes to recover.
I am able to talk now. That tear, they set off a second. Yeah, you see, my eyes are watering a little bit from the tear gas, and I feel it in my lungs.
Most of the demonstrators were knocked down by the gas.
You were prepared, obviously, today, huh?
You know, I'm ready for whatever's going to happen. I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to say what I have to say.
During the chaos, the first arrest and more pepper spray. However, protesters continue to block anyone trying to enter.
Right now, state troopers are trying to make a pathway through the protesters to get through, but as you can see,
after a tug of war, the man makes it to the other side, albeit a little shaken.
At noon, the streets were still in chaos. The downtown area was shut down.
The Secret Service decided it was just too dangerous to move Secretary of State Madeleine Albright and Trade Representative Charlene Barshevsky from their hotel rooms at the Westin Hotel.
So far, things were going pretty much the way the protesters had hoped. And then, right where we're standing, suddenly something happened that the protesters didn't expect.
A gang of anarchists hit the Starbucks at Pacific Place. Then they hit the Seafirst Bank, doubled back on 5th, trashing stores in Westlake Center. They turned on Pine, hitting more targets.
And Megan Black saw it all. After being gassed, Megan had moved to 6th and Pine for the start of the anarchist rampage.
Protesters had been tear-gassed all morning. Finally, there was a lull in the activity when all of a sudden a group we had seen all morning, a group we now know as anarchists called the Black Bloc, began terrorizing the city. I was live on the phone as it started.
Trying to break the windows. They're slamming against the windows. Oh my gosh, they just broke the Starbucks window. They're breaking into it right now. I'm moving across the street.
It was a frightening moment, and I think I was in shock. I had been separated from my photographer, but as I followed this group, I soon met up with another Cairo photographer, Frank Simon, as the group's rage turned toward him. Photographer Eric Wald and I then followed the black bloc. There were about 30 of them, isolated by their black clothing, black hoods, and masks. It was obvious as they continued their destruction that they were renegade protesters.
Yeah, take off the mask. Take off your mask and join the rest of us and shut up.
And now we're at the McDonald's at 3rd and Pine, where they are breaking more windows. They broke windows at the Gap. They're smashing windows at McDonald's. They're dumping over garbage cans. And they are very angry again and hostile. We're seeing more clashes with other protesters telling them to stop because they're giving everyone a bad name. None of the protesters, the legitimate protesters down here, want any of this kind of action, and they are very angry.
So right now, knocking at the newspaper.
Megan, any sign yet of police trying to track them down?
Not police anywhere. They're going like... They're breaking the bank window here at U.S. Bank. We got to get out of here. We're going to run up the street because if they see us, they attack us. And so we're keeping a safe distance away from them.
Several police officers have told us because they were assigned to control the protest crowds, they weren't allowed to break ranks and to stop the black bloc. So the group just continued destroying property for nearly an hour. Anarchist Daniel Burton Rose says he didn't take part in the violence, but he cheered the black bloc on. He says the destruction is a political message targeting capitalism and attempting to eliminate it.
Destroy the stuff that you feel oppresses you. I mean, as an anarchist, you try to make a commitment to confront like domination everywhere you see it.
What gives you the right to destroy what other people enjoy?
What gives these people the right to always be invading our space? Like, I don't think there's a neutral.
But it's against the law.
You know, I mean, resisting is against the law. Like, we know that.
So with disregard to any consequences, the black bloc continued the violence. During the rampage, Mayor Paul Schell says he realized something had to be done. He then called in the National Guard.
All of that violence took place here on Pine Street, the site of Tuesday's biggest and most peaceful march of the day.
The Labor March was the event that everyone feared would shut down the city on Tuesday afternoon. In the end, it was overshadowed by other, more chaotic events of the day.
The Labor March was one of the biggest protests in Seattle since the 60s. Chris Lagares provided our coverage.
People united will never be defeated.
They came by the busload to Memorial Stadium. United Farm Workers from California, steel workers from Cleveland, Ohio.
I took my vacation to come out here.
A pilot from Washington, D.C.
We're here to protect our jobs.
Construction workers wearing hard hats, mingling with environmentalists wearing green. All of them saying no to the WTO, despite their widely diverse backgrounds.
Here we are, we're all together. Pat Buchanan and Jimmy Hoffa. Can you believe that?
Hell no! Hell no!
Even more unbelievable to some was the size of this crowd as it marched downtown. An estimated 40,000 people.
The city of Seattle has literally been overrun by marchers.
Our own Cairo anchors noting the numbers as we carried the parade live.
Well, obviously, I would say if union members from around the country came here to make a statement, they are succeeding.
And as they marched, we listened to their complaints against this World Trade Organization.
They're basically making plans to figure out how they're going to divide up the world.
They want to offload our work to foreign countries for cheaper labor.
We're not against world trade, the rules of world trade. We're against world trade without rules. And that's what we have right now.
What do we want? Stop slavery, Burma!
With their chants and signs, they condemn child and slave labor, demanding better wages and working conditions in third world nations, human rights and human dignity. Jim Hoffa.
How you doing?
Good. We're live on Cairo television.
Oh, great.
This has been a massive demonstration.
Unbelievable.
What do you attribute it to?
Well, I think the dedication of the workers here, the brothers and sisters.
And they brought in some of the most powerful names in organized labor to state their case. We talked to the head of the Teamsters live.
It's not fair what they're doing to the WTO. We've got to make sure that everybody participates in what's going on. We've got to have better labor standards, and we've got to make sure that labor and environmentalists have a seat at the table.
For sheer spectacle, Seattle has never seen anything like it. A giant condom going down the street, urging the WTO to practice safe trade.
topless women chanting, "This is what democracy looks like." A coalescence of interest, Jim Hoffa called it, all worried that the WTO is putting corporate greed over human needs.
They're not for their workers, they're for themselves, they're for corporate.
Despite appearances, the rest of the downtown streets were hardly peaceful during the labor march. Thousands of demonstrators were still blocking the streets, refusing to move.
Neil Karlinski was with a huge crowd at 4th and Pike when police finally made their move to clear the streets.
To say the first day of the WTO ended with a bang may be the understatement of the year. The scene was 4th and Pike, right in the very heart of downtown.
Threw my hands like this and I said peace, like that. And all of a sudden, boom, I get hit in the chest with a tear gas canister. I couldn't even move. I was on the ground like this.
It all began when a few protesters tried to bust through the lines of police. For roughly the next 3 hours, photographer Mark Marash and I took up position atop these newspaper stands. This is the direction we were looking, but this is what we saw. As it played out on the air, the closest live picture was down the street. We did our best using a cell phone to broadcast.
People in the streets, are throwing things, large wooden blocks, back at the police officers.
From roughly 3 to 6 p.m., protesters burned garbage dumpsters, taunted police, and generally refused to vacate what should have been one of the busiest intersections downtown. One protester simply put himself at the front of the group and sat down, defying police. As people looked on from office windows up above, those blinded by tear gas were led away.
We will maintain this intersection. They cannot move us if we are seated.
At one point, the crowd swelled to such proportions you had to look hard just to see the line of police on 4th Avenue. The group, which formed to protest the WTO, was now reacting angrily to a new target, the police who had blocked their advance and who are now trying to clear them using every piece of non-lethal weaponry at their disposal.
They are shooting tear gas with no warning or nothing.
Finally, just past 5 o'clock, police set out to clear the intersection regardless of who got in the way. While one line of officers stood their ground, a second line of police advanced from Pike Street, firing tear gas and flashbangs, even shooting rubber bullets as they advanced.
This country is full of sons of bitches!
An angry crowd retreated amidst heavy tear gas, and we did too. After running for blocks in every direction away from police, weary protesters littered the sidewalks.
Oh, God.
By just past 5:30, police had cleared the intersection of everything but smoldering trash dumpsters. This was how the sun set on the WTO's opening day.
As riot police were clearing the downtown streets, Mayor Schell, Governor Locke, and King County Executive Ron Sims held a joint news conference. After turning down an offer to call up the National Guard earlier in the day, Mayor Schell announced his new plan to restore order.
Declared an emergency, a state of emergency for the city. That allows us to do a number of things. One is to request the governor for some help from the National Guard, which I've done. It allows us to impose a curfew from 7 in the morning until daybreak.
But an order from the mayor was hardly going to clear the streets. Tuesday night saw more looting. Police pushed demonstrators out of the restricted area, past here, up Pine Street, into Capitol Hill. Deborah Horn was there for that first violent night of civil emergency.
With orders to clear out downtown Seattle, the police began their final assault on protesters on Pine Street near 8th Avenue. It was 10 minutes after 6 Tuesday night. The state of emergency was just an hour old.
We're now getting a little bit of the tear gas that was thrown just a moment ago because we are right here at this intersection.
Some protesters taunted police officers who silently stood their ground, their sole focus on moving the protesters out. It was nearly 6:30.
There was disruption by just a few hundred people.
Far from the chaotic streets of Seattle, Governor Gary Locke was hosting a dinner for the WTO delegates at the Museum of Flight as they socialized. Canisters of pepper spray were being released, sending police and protesters fleeing. In another part of downtown, a bonfire raged. There were no police to stop it.
We're going to pick up the truck when they get out of his range.
The police were still blocks away on Pine Street, still firing canisters on the crowd. Incredibly, my photographer, Bill Skoke, continued taking pictures, even as the pepper spray made it difficult for him to see. And the police kept coming. But at 6th and Stewart, a new chaos broke out. It was 7:15. Protesters had turned their anger on Starbucks, breaking windows, looting the store. A protester tried to stop the melee because, again, there were no police officers anywhere. By then, the police had reclaimed Pine Street, having pushed protesters out. Tear gas filled the air as downtown Seattle lay eerily in the distance.
That was the end of the first day, but Wednesday would not bring calm.
In fact, it brought the president and a whole new set of problems. Our timeline continues when we come back.
But first, you've been seeing our reporters in front of the cameras. Now and through the rest of this broadcast, you'll hear the personal reflections of the people who took those incredible pictures.
All you can do is videotape what's in front of you, and I had, one protester that was kind of getting things going, trying to block traffic. I was videotaping him, and he made a point of stopping me, putting his hand over the lens. Nothing makes us angrier as a photojournalist is someone assaulting us, stopping us from doing our work.
11 at 11 on Cairo 7 Eyewitness News brings you coverage of the top stories and 11 minutes of uninterrupted news, weather, and sports in the first 11 minutes. 11 at 11 on Cairo 7 Eyewitness News. Complete Northwest news coverage.